Live from the Washington, D.C. area, it's the Inside Scoop. All the news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's the host.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Deborah A Woolen, and I'm your host for Inside Scoop. As many of you may know, if you turn on your television, we all are questioning or wondering what is the state of policing in the United States. We're all riveted by the death of Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, and even most recently, the murder of Tyree Nichols. Well, I'm sure all of us are wondering as well, where does Fairfax County stand in that? So I am super pleased this evening that we'll have a great discussion, starting off with the county's Independent Police Auditor, Richard Schott. Richard, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So let's get into it. What is your role? What do people need to know about you? Where are you from? Where did you grow up? What's your favorite color? No?
Well, thank you.
Sure.
I'm originally from New Orleans, Louisiana, and I've been here in the position of Independent Police Auditor for Fairfax County since April of 2017. Before that, I had been in the FBI for 27, almost 28 years with the FBI, originally as a field or a street agent working federal criminal violations. And from after doing that for about 8 years, almost 9, I gravitated, if you will, to kind of the legal side of FBI work, and I served as the Associate Division Counsel for the Atlanta Division for a couple of years. And then there was an opening in the Legal Instruction Unit at the FBI Academy in Quantico, Virginia, which I was very intrigued by and had been ever since my trainee days back in the late 1980s with the Legal Instruction Unit. So when that unit opening became available, I put in and was fortunate enough to be selected for a Legal Instruction Unit / agent position at the FBI Academy in 2000. And actually, I shake my head when I say it, I spent the final 17 years of my career at the FBI Academy serving in that unit, instructing primarily FBI agent trainees, but also thousands of state, local, and even international law enforcement officers in the FBI's National Academy program.
Okay, so before we get into your role with the county, I think that's quite a jump from FBI agent to instructor or legal instructor. So what in your background, what contributed to that transition?
Well, I'm a lawyer by trade. I indicated I was from New Orleans. I went to law school at Loyola University down in New Orleans, and I consider myself fortunate to have been able to go directly from law school into the FBI without ever practicing law as a lawyer. Within about 3 or 4 years, I got involved in the legal program. I was not yet in Atlanta in an official capacity, but I started doing some training very early in my career. I was in what the FBI calls a resident agency, which is a satellite office of a field division. So I was assigned to the Birmingham division, but I was further assigned to the Tuscaloosa, Alabama resident agency. And while there, it was myself and 2 other agents, and we had the responsibility of covering 7 counties in Northwest Alabama. So I worked on a daily basis with local law enforcement, police, sheriff's deputies, and the FBI was frequently asked and invited to provide training to local departments. So I started training at an early age for an FBI agent, and then when I got the selection to the Legal Instruction Unit, it was I wouldn't say rigorous, but it was I did have to prove that I could be an effective instructor in an academy setting.
Okay, so you operated, or you had an opportunity to work with local law enforcement as a federal agent.
Yes, very frequently.
Okay, so what were some of the, I guess, where's the intersectionality in that as far as it informing your perspective as a law enforcement official?
Well, law enforcement officers, no matter what level they're on, federal, state, local, they're all bound by the U.S. Constitution as the basis for what law enforcement does. Primarily, the Fourth, the Fifth, and the Sixth Amendments, especially the Fourth Amendment. The Fourth Amendment is really the bedrock principle for what any law enforcement officer does. So a lot of my...
And share that for our audience,
well,
the Fourth Amendment.
The Fourth Amendment is the amendment which addresses searches and seizures, and basically says people in this country shall not be subjected to an unreasonable search or a seizure. The flip side to that is, in this country, you can very well be subjected to a reasonable Fourth Amendment search or seizure. So the important thing for every law enforcement officer to be aware of is what makes, well, first, what is a search, what is a seizure, and if I'm engaged in one of those activities, what makes it reasonable as opposed to unreasonable. Because if you're engaging in unreasonable activity, then you're violating the Constitution, and you should not be allowed to continue in law enforcement.
Okay.
I don't want to give short shrift to the First Amendment. We also frequently talked and provided instruction on First Amendment issues, but in my role now, really the Fourth Amendment is kind of the bedrock that I'm wedded to.
Gotcha. Okay, so fast forward then to you have a law background, and then you have your experience as a federal agent working with law enforcement. Then you get an instruction opportunity to being an independent auditor for the county. Describe that transition.
Well, that's a great question. I was literally still on board with the FBI when the Fairfax County Board of Supervisors created the Independent Police Auditor position. As of yet, it had never been in existence, so obviously it had never been filled by anyone. And I learned about the creation of this office while I was reading the newspaper while still an FBI agent. I was retirement eligible, and after reading the job description for what this newly created position would be doing, I thought that I could probably, if I were lucky enough to get the position, I thought I could do a good job doing it and reviewing investigations very, very methodically and fairly.
Why did the Board of Supervisors create this position?
Well, unfortunately, there was a very tragic shooting of a Fairfax County resident in 2013. The shooting was tragic enough, and some of what played out, lack of transparency, delays in releasing information, holding a lot of information very close to the vest, sometimes not even sharing it with the prosecutor's office to determine whether charges should have been filed, resulted in the Board of Supervisors taking a very hard look at the police practices that were then in place in Fairfax County. And under the supervision of then Chairman Sharon Bulova on the board, an ad hoc commission to examine police procedures was created in 2015. From March of 2015 through October of 2015, a very deep dive into the practices of the Fairfax County Police Department was undertaken by this ad hoc commission. At the conclusion of their analysis, the commission presented literally 202 recommendations to the board where they thought improvements could be made. One, or more accurately, two of the recommendations, 2 out of the 202, were the creation of what's generically or generally referred to as civilian oversight of law enforcement. I say two of the recommendations in this case because when Fairfax County did adopt the notion of civilian oversight, they did it in a twofold method. And that is they created the Office of the Independent Police Auditor as well as a police civilian review panel. And if you don't mind, I'll continue and just describe kind of at a 20,000 foot view what the difference between the two offices is and why the board chose to go with kind of both barrels, if you will. This was a new concept for Fairfax County. Again, there had not been civilian oversight. And as you can imagine, I don't think law enforcement is unique in saying this. People within the profession were a little bit skeptical about who was going to be reviewing what they did. And they were especially concerned about a panel of civilians with no law enforcement experience casting judgment on the issue of their using force, which I said it when I was in the FBI. There's no greater responsibility for a law enforcement officer than when he or she decides to use force, especially deadly force, which is something that anyone in law enforcement must be prepared for, but hopefully none wants to have to use. So some of the resistance from the police representatives was for use of force issues, we would like someone with law enforcement experience. Now, the day I retired from the FBI, I did become, in fact, a civilian. So I am part of civilian oversight, but I have law enforcement experience in my background. So it was somewhat of a compromise.
I think that's so interesting, the term that you used, that law enforcement was concerned about civilians casting judgment, especially in the way of use of force or even deadly force. When we come back, we will continue our conversation with the Fairfax County Independent Police Auditor, Richard Schott, and he will help us examine some of the practices and procedures behind his role. Please don't go anywhere and join us when we come back.
Nice going, Spencer! I can't believe we broke Old Man Hennessy's window.
Correction, dude. You broke. I just threw the ball.
This is really bad. What are we gonna do?
We? Go to the door and ask for the ball back.
Are you serious?
It's my ball, Myrtleback.
You're so dead. I'd run away.
Yeah, to Uruguay.
Kiss your life goodbye. Sorry.
Let's go. Yeah, you got me and your well.
Nice one. Some friends you are.
Keep smiling, keep shining.
Hi. Hi. Tell him it was an accident. And we can fix the window. Come on. I'll come with you.
Loyalty. Pass it on.
You go first.
A message from the Foundation for a Better Life.
One day these rats were playing in the woods. Well, it's a matches and that's no good. Listen to smoke before you give it a try. Only you. Don't play with matches. Don't play with fire. Cause there's nothing very funny about nothing very nice. Holy spice. So if a gorgeous force is what you desire, don't play with matches. Don't play with fire.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Fire.
Awkward. I'm the awkward silence. You try to avoid me, then there I am again. But an awkward silence can be a great thing, like Kelly here is about to demonstrate.
You haven't really been yourself lately. Are you okay?
Find out how you can help a friend with their mental health at seizetheawkward.org.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Thank you so much for joining us, everyone. Thank you for coming back as we continue our conversation with Fairfax County's Independent Police Auditor, Richard Schott. So Richard, before we went into the break, you were talking about trepidation, if I could use that word, kind of going through law enforcement at the creation of these oversight bodies, and law enforcement being concerned about civilians. You said casting judgment, especially in the area of, or the areas of use of force or even deadly force. And while you were talking, one thing that stood out to me was that is exactly how I want a law enforcement officer to feel when he or she is encountering me. I want them to understand that they too are a civilian. So civilians should be able to have, even from an uninformed perspective, be able to feel and perceive that actions that are taken, that they make sense, that they are fair. So just kind of continue in that vein as far as how the county addressed those concerns.
Well, I think a big part of my role is spelled out in the action item passed by the Board of Supervisors, which created my position. What I mean by that is, for every investigation that I review, I have to release a public report of the review that I've conducted. And my report, I try to be as transparent, and I try to provide as much transparency to the community as I can. And I recognize the police department obviously needs to be transparent as well. But my reports, I think, which are all publicly available on the auditor's website, really provides a little more detail into what transpired during the incident that I've reviewed, as well as what was done during the investigation to determine whether the actions of the officer were justified, legal, within policy, and maybe most important, whether they could be improved upon. So one aspect in each of my reports is I have a recommendations section at the end. And even if I think the incident was handled well and properly, and that the use of force might have been legal and within policy, there may well be recommendations that I think I'm able to provide to hopefully prevent the situation from occurring again. Oftentimes I don't have any recommendations to make, but I still include the recommendations section. And I just say, based on this incident review, I have no recommendations to make. But in many reviews, I do provide suggested recommendations.
Okay, and so that was going to lead to my next question. I was going to ask, off of the top of your head, what percentage of, I guess, audits that you conduct, what percentage actually results in, recommendations or concerning cases?
I just ran the numbers, and I think in exactly 25% of my reviews, and there have been 55 of them over the 5 years, 25% have included one or more recommendations. So the number is, the number of recommendations I've made is, I believe, around 40 to 45 recommendations, and probably about 80% of those have been implemented by the police department. So, and typically if they choose not to implement a recommendation, they explain why, and usually it's to my satisfaction.
Wow. Something else. So, so I guess for the sake of our viewers, what's the process? Something comes to your desk. What is the process of it getting to you, and then what happens after it comes to you?
Yeah, that's a great question. For some incidents, my review of the police department's investigation is automatic. I don't need for the police department to invite me to review. I don't need to wait for the Board of Supervisors to instruct me to review, nor do I need a member of the public making a complaint asking me to review. The automatic type reviews involve an officer-involved shooting, a use of force which results in death or serious injury to an individual, which may or may not be an officer-involved shooting. The distinction is that an officer may shoot and miss an individual, causing no death or serious injury or any injury, but it's still an officer-involved shooting. And the flip side is an officer may force somebody to the ground because they're having difficulty getting handcuffs on them, and if the person hits his head on concrete and sustains a concussion, that may constitute a serious injury, and I'm going to be reviewing. Separate from that, let's say a person is taken down to the ground, no injury results, but they feel like the force was excessive nonetheless. They have the ability to complain. They can complain directly to the police department, or they can make a complaint to my office, which, because it has not yet gone to the police department, I have to refer that complaint to the police department for them to conduct the investigation. But because that use of force was coupled with a complaint, I will be doing a review, and again, in my mind, more important, I will be publishing a public report covering what I've discovered during my review.
And what are some, so Fairfax County compared to other jurisdictions, how do you think that Fairfax County kind of stands out?
As far as civilian oversight?
Yes.
Yeah, that's another great question. Many people that I talk to are shocked when they hear the figure of there being approximately 18,000 separate law enforcement agencies in the United States alone. 18,000. That's anywhere from 30,000 officer New York Police Department to maybe even a one-person police department in rural Alabama. 18,000 departments, and at last count, about 400 of which have civilian oversight over them or of them. So it's a very small fraction in the grand scheme of things. I will say, though, most of your major, large metropolitan departments are included in that approximately 400. So the world of oversight is expanding, especially over the past 3 years since the murder of George Floyd. With that being said, I've been in this position engaged in civilian oversight of law enforcement for 5 years. Just 5 years ago, the number of civilian oversight entities was closer to about 200. So it's gotten much bigger. Uniquely, when Fairfax County and the board decided to implement civilian oversight, again, they came in and established both the auditor position and the civilian review panel. So we're unique, even among the relatively few jurisdictions that have oversight. And I will say again, not just nationally, but at a state level, civilian oversight is increasing. Our neighbors in Arlington County, City of Alexandria, Richmond, Charlottesville, and the University of Virginia, separate from the city of Charlottesville, have all very recently implemented a form of civilian oversight. I think I'm right about this. None of those jurisdictions have implemented the dual body like we have here, but they have implemented civilian oversight.
And when you say dual body, what do you mean by that?
Well, again, I'm referring to the auditor and the civilian review panel.
I see, okay.
And the difference that the board laid out here, again, my jurisdiction, for lack of a better term, almost always revolves around a use of force having occurred. The civilian review panel has jurisdiction over allegations into alleged serious misconduct or an abuse of authority, but not involving a use of force.
I see.
So it's a kind of a hybrid model.
Switching gears a bit and taking things to a national level, when you see something as egregious as how Tyree Nichols was handled a couple of minutes ago, you mentioned if an officer is having trouble taking someone to the ground, and if the end of that arrest ends in serious injury or death, how are you processing things like that and how that may translate to the local level?
Well, it's, I think people are more focused on getting good, legal, constitutional law enforcement from their local law enforcement officers when they see an event such as what happened in Memphis. It really, at a local level, brings the attention back, if you will, on we need to make sure our law enforcement officers are doing things the right way. And I think I may be wrong about this, I haven't seen a dramatic uptick, at least not yet. It's only been a little over a month since Mr. Nichols' death. But it could promote people who feel that they've been aggrieved by the police department here in Fairfax County to explore what are my options. What do we have here? And if they learn more about my office and the civilian review panel, they may be that much more likely to pick up the phone and lodge a complaint.
So bringing it back to a local level, what are some trends in your research that you've noticed within the county?
Well, one, I would say the overall numbers of use of force since I've been here, and it's a relatively short window, the overall numbers of uses of force has actually gone down. Now, people may have differing opinions on that. Part of it, I believe, in 2020 and into 2021 was just based on the fact that fewer people were out, fewer people were on the roads, fewer people were interacting. Law enforcement had, like the rest of the world, had shifted and become more of a virtual functioning department. But patrol can't be virtual. But the numbers of officer-involved shootings for 2022 was a little higher than what I've seen in the past 5 years.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Mr. Schott. Come back and join us as we speak with Mr. Stevenson of Fairfax County.
Nice going, Spencer! I can't believe we broke old man Hennessy's window.
Correction, dude. You broke. I just threw the ball.
This is really bad. What are we gonna do?
We? Go to the door and ask for the ball back.
Are you serious?
It's my ball, Myrtleback.
You're so dead. I'd run away.
Yeah, to Uruguay.
Kiss your life goodbye. Sorry.
Let's go. Yeah, you never mean you're well.
Nice one. Some friends you are.
Keep smiling, keep shining.
Hi. Tell him it was an accident. And we can fix the window. Come on. I'll come with you.
Loyalty. Pass it on.
You go first.
A message from the Foundation for a Better Life.
One day these rats were playing in the woods. Well, it's a matches and that's no good. Listen to smoke before you give it a try.
Only you.
Don't play with matches. Don't play with fire. Cause there's nothing very funny about nothing very nice. Holy smile. So if a gorgeous force is what you desire, don't play with matches. Don't play with fire.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Fire.
Awkward. I'm the awkward silence. You try to avoid me, then there I am again. But an awkward silence can be a great thing, like Kelly here is about to demonstrate.
You haven't really been yourself lately. Are you okay?
Find out how you can help a friend with their mental health at seizetheawkward.org.
we're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Deborah Woolen, and I'm your host for Inside Scoop. Thank you so much for coming back and joining us. So I made a mistake during the last segment. I introduced our new guest as Mr. Stevenson. His name's actually Stephen Richardson. He is the new Executive Director of Fairfax County's Police Civilian Review Panel. Thank you so much for joining us.
It is my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So, Stephen, you are the new Executive Director of the PCRP. That's a new role for the county. But before we get into that, and like what you do, your role, your interactions with the previous person that we had here, the Independent Police Auditor, before we get into all of that, tell us your background, how you got to Fairfax County, your law enforcement background, all that great information.
Sure. So I have what I would say is a pretty interesting background. Coming out of undergraduate school, I worked with the New York City Council for a few years. And while working there, I worked very closely with law enforcement, with members of the New York City Police Department. And shortly after 9/11, I decided, you know what, I want to serve my city in that capacity. And so I took the test and became a New York City police officer. I served in the New York City Police Department for 10 years. Started out on patrol in uniform, worked my way into a plainclothes anti-crime unit and investigations. I, again, worked with NYPD for 10 years and then had a wonderful opportunity to relocate to Chicago for graduate school and to work with the Cook County Sheriff's Office. And so I resigned from NYPD, moved to Chicago, worked with the Cook County Sheriff's Office as a project manager over their police department, and attended graduate school. Shortly before the pandemic, I had an opportunity to go to Charlotte, North Carolina and work as a criminal magistrate. I have family in Charlotte, North Carolina. It was a wonderful opportunity, and so I jumped at that opportunity and relocated to Charlotte, North Carolina. In 2020, the end of 2020, I was offered a position with the George Washington University Police Department as captain of operations for the George Washington University Police Department. And I accepted the position, and as captain of operations, I was over patrol, detectives, all investigations, use of force investigations, reviewing of body cameras and such. And so I took that position. While in that position, I learned of Fairfax County that they were going to be looking for an executive director. And once that job announcement came out, I applied for and was subsequently appointed to this position in February of 22.
Wow. So I think it's going to be important to point out that came from New York and went to Cook County. When it comes to law enforcement, those are just like, you know, hot spots.
Absolutely.
So, gosh, and quite honestly, being black and being in law enforcement, being black while serving blue, especially in those hot spots. What was your experience from that perspective?
So it's an interesting experience. Obviously, as a young man growing up in New York City, I've had encounters with police that weren't always kind. That was one of the reasons why I joined the police department, because I always feel that if you're not a part of the solution, then you're a part of the problem. And so I joined to get a better understanding of policing, to serve my city, and to really do my part. So as a New York City police officer, I had an opportunity to see police officers at their best and police officers at their worst. I was on the job during the Sean Bell incident, and knew individuals that were involved with that. And but I also understand, having done policing for a decade, that it's a very tough job. It's a job where you're making split-second decisions. It's a job where, in spite of everything, your goal is to get home at night. It's a job where sometimes you feel like you're a target, sometimes you feel that no one understands the work that you do. And so for me, it was important that, particularly when I was in uniform, that I approached the job using all of the information that I had from my own experience. And I had opportunity to talk to youth, to give kids a break. You have a great deal of discretion as a police officer with regards to what action you're going to take. And so my motto was always, if there's a way that I can talk to someone, I would do that rather than, unless it required that I took them into custody or wrote a summons, I would talk to them and try to get them on a different path. So it was very rewarding 10 years.
Okay, so transitioning from your time in New York, then to Chicago, then to back over to the East Coast, and your work with George Washington University, you see this opportunity. Is it George Washington or Georgetown?
George Washington.
Okay, GW. So you see this opportunity to kind of serve in a different capacity as an executive director. Instead of me assuming what that role is for our viewers, describe to us what that role is.
The executive director role?
Yes.
So the executive director role, it's an evolving role, I will say that. The executive director role of the Police Civilian Review Panel. Right.
Yes.
Yeah, so being executive director of the Police Civilian Review Panel is an evolving role. And by that I mean that when the role was first envisioned, it was primarily to make the work of the panel known to the greater Fairfax community, and for my office to staff the monthly meetings of the panel itself. What it's evolving into is an office that is not just managing the day-to-day operations of the panel, but also directing the efforts of the panel, if you will. One of the things that happens, one of the byproducts of being in the community and listening to residents is getting a greater understanding of what people are looking for or hoping for from civilian oversight. The work that I do in the community, I do on behalf of my office and the Office of the Independent Police Auditor. And so, in speaking to community residents and understanding what they're hoping for, what they're looking for, what their concerns are, it encouraged me to create opportunities for community members, residents of Fairfax County, to come together with their elected officials, with officials throughout the law enforcement continuum, meaning the Fairfax County Police Department, the Sheriff's Department, the Fire Department, the Commonwealth's Attorney's Office, anyone within that criminal justice continuum. We try to create opportunities to bridge those gaps and to put people in the room with those representatives and share their concerns as well.
Absolutely. And so this position is new.
Yes.
The Board of Supervisors, it was a suggestion from the PCRP, from a report, and so this position came into play in 2022.
Yes.
So what has it been like in this short amount of time?
So it's been a labor of love. Number one, we have an incredible panel. The panel consists of 9 Fairfax County residents that volunteer their time to sit down and review matters of police misconduct and abuse of authority. In so doing, all of our meetings are public meetings. One of my first orders of business was to bring the panel out to the community. So where they used to have all of their meetings at the government center, we now have our meetings all throughout Fairfax County. So we've had meetings at the James Lee Community Center, at the Gum Springs Community Center, at Dar Hijra Islamic Center. We're having an upcoming meeting at First Baptist Church of Vienna. We're going to be having a meeting at George Mason University. And so the goal is to get people to come out, see the panel, interact with the panelists, and see how much thought and work goes into reviewing the matters. And so it's been an absolute labor of love.
So based upon my research, most of the folks on the panel, and this includes you, and even the research that I did on Richard Schott, who is the county's independent police auditor, everyone has a background in law or law enforcement. Is there anyone on the panel that's just your average person, your average Joe?
So the quick answer is yes. However, I think that in its infancy, the panel only going into its 6th year, what happened is that the people that immediately responded to the call for volunteers were people with a legal background, which is not necessarily a bad thing, because having individuals with a legal background immediately gave the panel credibility, because you had individuals that were more or less informed. But the goal from my office is to let people around the county know that anyone can join the panel. You don't have to have a legal background. In fact, we want the perspective of Ms. Johnson. We want the perspective of, Ms. Garcia. We want all perspectives represented on the panel. And we do have a diverse panel. So we have individuals of varying race and ethnicities, as well as religious backgrounds. But we do, as you stated, currently have several attorneys on the panel, which again is helpful when dissecting matters that have legal overtones.
So how do you answer the question or the suspicion of the fox watching the hen house? If everyone on the panel has, or let's just say 90% of the folks on the panel have a law or law enforcement background, how can someone within the community, someone, from the Richmond corridor, how can they be sure that their interests are going to be represented or taken into consideration if they have a concern that they've reported of misconduct?
Well, first, let me state that the overwhelming majority of the attorneys that are currently on the panel are not criminal attorneys. Law is a very wide field, and so we have attorneys that deal with juvenile issues, attorneys that are corporate attorneys, attorneys that are in politics, and so many do not deal with criminal issues. That's number one. And number two, one of the things that I've found in my travels throughout the county is that when I'm able to speak to people and they're able to come to the panel and see, again, the amount of thoughtfulness that goes into those reviews, I think that any concerns are immediately dispelled. We have a very, very caring and thoughtful panel that puts aside any pretense and just comes to do the work.
Absolutely. I think that's really important. I mean, I'm glad that you are doing these events where you go to the community, you're introducing yourself and the panel members to the community to kind of dispel that concern of they don't really care about us, essentially.
Right.
Please make sure you come back and continue the conversation with Stephen Richardson, the first executive director of the Police Civilian Review Panel. I'll see you soon.
Every time I hear the alarm bell go off in school, I think it's an air raid. A lot of houses in our neighborhood have been destroyed. I like to close my ears and sing songs whenever the bombs come close. I'm worried our new neighbors won't like us. But I know it's all gonna be worth it. I just want my family to be safe. But these are not my words. These are not my words. These are not my words.
One day these rats were playing in the woods. Well, it's some matches and that's no good. Listen to smoke before you give it a try.
Only you.
Don't play with matches. Don't play with fire. Cause there's nothing very funny about nothing very nice on a homeless mind. So if a gorgeous force is what you desire, don't play with matches. Don't play with fire.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Fire.
How far would you go to protect the planet?
I want you to build an ark.
Here we go. Okay, that's good. Oh, okay. Ow!
Maybe there's another way.
People, the flood is imminent!
Is it too much to ask for a little precipitation?
Go to fightglobalwarming.com to find out what you and your community can do to reduce global warming pollution.
When it comes to saving money,
What?
don't act like a baby.
Oh, it's like they're having their own little meeting. This is so humiliating.
Be the boss.
I'm the boss.
What the?
Power nap. You were saying.
And make a budget.
Let's get to work.
Need a little help?
Stacy, read back the notes.
I can't read. What's it say?
Create a personalized savings plan and get other tools and tips
We can share.
You obviously didn't go to business school.
at feedthepig.org.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Thank you so much for joining us as we continue our conversation with Stephen Richardson, the Executive Director of Fairfax County's Police Civilian Review Panel, a new position that was created by the Board of Supervisors. So Stephen, let's segue the conversation a bit into kind of your perspective of the state of policing nationwide. We've talked about your background. You have experience in New York and then Chicago, and then even at the local level here, and your work at George Washington. But just the state of policing, as I mentioned earlier, Tyree Nichols and just other egregious instances, it just kind of seems to pop up more and more, not only in the Black community, even though the Black community is more heavily impacted by use of force, but just what perspective do you have on the state of policing today? Areas of improvement from a policy perspective, like what do we do?
So I think it's great that we're having the discussion about policing nationwide. There are inherent challenges in that police officers, police departments are susceptible to the same pressures that any other entity has, whether it be peer pressure, codes of silence, insecurities, all of those things that are not uncommon to any of us are also found in police departments. The glaring difference is that police officers have the authority to take someone's freedom or to possibly take someone's life. And so when you look at it that way, it means that is a job that requires seeking out the best possible candidates. The vetting process has to be of the highest order. I believe that in Fairfax County, we do a great job with vetting incoming recruits into our police department and into the police academy. And I just think that police are necessary. Obviously, the police department is necessary. We all want to live in safe communities. And so it's a matter of, again, the vetting process for people applying for the job, certainly training, cultural sensitivity training, diversity training, trying to get the most diverse department that you can get. All of that is important. And then recognizing that there is a historical perspective, that there are communities that historically have experienced challenges with policing. And so there's a great deal of apprehension within certain communities when it comes to interactions with police departments. There's cultural differences that police need to be aware of, and so policing is unique because it touches so many aspects of life that police officers are asked to do a lot. I think you become a cop and then realize immediately that sometimes you have to be a social worker, sometimes a mental health counselor, sometimes a referee. And we have to ask ourselves, is that fair to our police departments? And if so, what are we doing to equip them with the tools that they need, the mental health services that they need, the training that they need? So I think that there has to be understanding on both sides of the ledger, the community for the police, and certainly the police for the community. And I always say that you can never account for what a person may do until they do it. And so, the hope is that we're putting the right people on the force, but what has to happen is that if someone acts out of bounds, the municipality, the agency has to be prepared to respond accordingly.
So not too long ago, I had attorney Chelsea Crawford. Mm-hmm. She has done extensive work in cases of police misconduct in Maryland. She said something interesting. My question was, if we have these oversight bodies and if we have these policies and procedures in place to ensure that there is proper behavior within law enforcement, what happens between establishing those procedures and then these egregious instances? And she said something interesting. She said that there's a difference between what is taught mm-hmm. and what's practiced.
Right.
And that's where you have these cultures essentially of misconduct and behavior that develop. Unfortunately, that ends up, hurting the public. In your seat, in your position, how can citizens of Fairfax County trust that you are part of that oversight to see those cultures possibly being formed and dismantling them?
So first, I would say that one cannot legislate character, right? And so we all live life from the inside out. And so what is going on in a person's heart, what's going on in a person's mind, what's exhibited in their character plays itself out over time. And police officers, again, are no different. The goal of training, the goal of legislation is to hopefully be prepared. Well, number one, to curtail those types of behaviors or negative behaviors, but to also be prepared if negative behaviors should appear. It's a very, again, it's a challenging thing because we entrust our police officers with so much authority, and rightfully so, that it becomes that much more damaging when one of them crosses the line. What I can say as a former police officer and working with police officers, again, throughout the country, and certainly and speaking with officers here and the Chief of Department, Kevin Davis, that no good cop wants a bad cop on the force. And so I believe that bodies like the Fairfax County Police Civilian Review Panel and the Independent Police Auditors and oversight bodies around the country create another opportunity for municipalities to look at what their police officers are doing, to have the community weigh in on it. My colleague earlier was talking about the legal aspect of policing, but there's also a moral aspect. So something can be perfectly legal, but is it right? Is it the right thing to do? Was there a better way that you could have done it? And I think that that's where we have to move policing into.
And so as your role as the executive director, where are you in all of that?
So where I am, is that hopefully the panel can be the conscience of the police department. As we review matters, much like the Independent Police Auditor's Office, we are able to make recommendations. Those recommendations oftentimes look like, instead of a police officer responding, is there a way that we can implement a policy where they wait time, where they take cover and allow for the situation to de-escalate rather than to immediately take action, depending upon the situation. It's an opportunity. So again, I think to answer your question, the panel is in many ways the conscience. It brings conscience to policing.
I think one thing that's interesting that Richard Schott said earlier is that Fairfax County has like this two-pronged approach when it comes to police oversight. And I think one thing that gives bite essentially to those bodies is power, right. Bylaws, words or rules that dictate what this body can and cannot do.
Right.
Just from your perspective, I'll add to that. For example, the last time I did some research, Prince William County, they have they have an oversight body for law enforcement, but no bylaws, right. No visibility. So do you think that it's important if other municipalities are going to have a similar model, that they empower these bodies?
Absolutely. The authority granted to the panel by the Fairfax County Board of Supervisors gives us the ability to make recommendations to the Fairfax County Police Department, and should they decide to not take up the recommendations, they have to provide a rationale for not taking it up. And if the panel disagrees, the panel can then go back to the Board of Supervisors and say, are you able to assist in moving this along? And I think that that's incredibly helpful. For the Fairfax County Police Department to know that the panel is fully empowered by the Board of Supervisors gives us that much more credibility when reviewing matters and when coming out with our recommendations matrix.
So what is the attitude of Fairfax County Police Department toward the Police Civilian Review Panel? Is there camaraderie? Is there kind of like this tension?
Well, I would say that at the top of the Fairfax County Police Department pyramid, there is a great deal of camaraderie and collaboration. In the just shy of a year that I've been here, Chief Davis has pretty much had an open door policy. Just about everything that I've asked for, he's been more than willing to provide for us. And I believe that that was the case prior to me coming aboard. Rank and file police officers may not be aware of that relationship or may not be aware of the goals and perspective of the panel. One of the things I heard when I first came on board, so just in traveling throughout the county, you had some people that felt that the panel and the auditor's office were just there to rubber stamp whatever the police department do, that we were puppets of the police department. And then you had those that felt that we were out to get the police department. And so it's been my job to say to people that no, it's none of the above. Our job is to literally review matters to determine whether or not the investigation done by the Fairfax County Police Department's Internal Affairs Bureau was complete, thorough, objective, impartial, and accurate. And if we disagree with their findings, we make it known through recommendations and through our reports.
Based upon what standard? You said impartial?
Right, so complete, the investigation, the panel needs to find that the investigation done by the Internal Affairs Bureau was complete, thorough, objective, impartial, and accurate.
Okay, and that's based upon standards of procedures within the county?
Right, that's exactly right.
Okay, if someone believes that they've been the victim of misconduct, what would you suggest that they do?
Well, actually, I'm glad you asked that question. If someone feels that they were the victim of police misconduct or abuse of authority, they can file a complaint one of several ways. One, they can file a complaint directly with the Fairfax County Police Department. If they request a review from the panel, once the Internal Affairs Bureau investigation is complete, then we have opportunity as a panel to review it. What that looks like is it begins with the subcommittee process. So we have a subcommittee within the panel that will review the initial complaint to see if there's anything there, if there's substance to the complaint, and if so, then the full panel will review that matter. So that's one way, going through the police department. Another way, you can literally walk a complaint into my office. You can literally come to the office and lodge a complaint.
This time has gone by so quickly. Stephen, thank you so much for joining us and sharing about your background. If you want to find more information, please be sure to visit Fairfax County's website. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a great evening.